始めましょうか。皆さん、こんにちは。名前はメイ・セラです。はじめまして、どうぞよろしくお願いします。ありがとう。日本語はよく話せないですからすみません。サンフランシスコに住んでいます。アメリカ人です。Ruby と Rails の開発者です。ピボタルラブズに勤めています。ピボタルラブズはピボタルトラッカーを制作しています。でも、ほとんどのピボタルラブズの社員はコンサルタントです。私も。自己紹介が終わりですから、その先から英語です。ごめんね。I'm here today to talk to you about JavaScript and how we can make it suck less. I like to call this talk making JavaScript into a real language in your web application development. And I want to start off by talking about what I like about Ruby. The thing that I like the most about Ruby is, of course, the language itself. I love the expressiveness. I love the flexibility. I love how accessible it is. And as a working developer, one of the other things that I like very much about Ruby is that I can test drive everything that I do. So between RSpec, test unit, Cucumber, Capybara, WebRat, and on and on and on, I can pick the right set of test tools for the project that I'm on, and I can test drive everything I do. So let's see how these stack up in JavaScript. The language itself is probably not going to change. I don't dislike JavaScript, but I think like many people in this room, I feel that Ruby fits my personality better. As far as test driving goes, though, one should be able to test drive JavaScript. But until earlier this year, I did not. And some of the best Ruby developers that I know who test drive all of their Ruby code don't test drive their JavaScript. And so I guess the question is, why not? Why do we make JavaScript development so painful? And how can we try and fix it? I think part of the problem as a Rails developer is that there's a philosophical mismatch between the way Rails treats JavaScript and the way it probably should be treated. So web applications, as you know, are fundamentally multilingual beasts. In the front end, you've got your HTML and your CSS and your JavaScript. On the server, you've got your Ruby and your SQL, and of course, this is vastly simplified from any real application, where there would also be ActionScript, maybe Objective-J, something exciting like that on the front end. And of course, it's never just a Ruby application. There's always other things you need to use. And I haven't worked on an application in a long time where the only data store was SQL. So this is vastly simplified. However, in the traditional model, the programming language would sit here in the middle. But if you use a framework like Rails, it tries to extend itself out in several directions to make it easier for you to do stuff. So for example, Rails extends itself out towards SQL using Active Record, and it actually is very successful. When you're writing a Rails application, even really complex ones, I've only had to go down and actually write SQL a few times in the course of the last maybe 4 years. On the other hand, it also tries to extend itself towards the front end, right, with various gems also. With ERB, you can generate HTML. With stuff like Sass, you can generate CSS. And it's got the RJS helpers that generate JavaScript. And this is a good idea when we're talking about SQL. And it works decently well with HTML and CSS, but it's kind of a disaster when it comes to JavaScript. And I want to point out first that this is not a failing of Rails itself, nor of the team who wrote Rails. This is the nature of JavaScript. It might be the one language whose use is evolving faster than that of Ruby. SQL has an ISO standard and a committee, and if anyone's going to make changes to the language, you have a 5-year warning period before they actually show up, and then the products that implement SQL also have committees. So as SQL end users, we are very well insulated from any churn in the language. But you can't really say the same about JavaScript. It's more like the Wild West. It's kind of the frontier right now. And while the language itself is relatively stable, its libraries and the usage patterns are changing faster than that of Ruby or that of Rails or of any framework. So what does that mean for us as web application developers and as multilingual programmers? It basically means we need to make an exception for JavaScript and opt out of some of the generation that happens. And that's the philosophical reason. I want to show you the practical reason why we need to do this. So in Rails 2, using RJS means you've got little bits of JavaScript scattered all over your code. And here's an example that I adapted from the Complex Forms Rails cast. It's a to-do list app, as you can probably tell. You can create a project, and then you can create any number of tasks within a project. And this is the new project form. And you can click the remove link, and it will remove the task from the page. And you can click add a task, and it will add a task field to the page. And this is implemented via simple JavaScript. So for purposes of this example, I think we're just going to look at the remove link. Let's take a look at how that's implemented. So this is the partial that is rendered for each task. The important part here is link to function, which is where we're creating a link that says remove, and when we click on that link, it executes that tiny little bit of JavaScript that removes the task div from the DOM. And here's the HTML that it generates. You've got that little bit of inline JavaScript, which by itself is fairly simple. The problem with this, though, from my perspective, is it's not really testable. You could write a Selenium test if you really felt like it that actually tests that it removes the DOM element, but this is one interaction, and on a typical modern web application, there will be dozens, if not hundreds of these on any given page. And if you're writing a Selenium test to verify that they all work, your test suite is never going to stop running. And of course, there's also kind of a philosophical problem with that, right? Which is that if you're only doing integration tests, you're missing opportunities that you need to take. You need to do unit tests and integration tests. So testing everything through Selenium is really not an option. So how can we redo this in a way that we could test? And a way that we can repeat, and as it gets more complicated, we can keep the complexity down in our code. So the first thing to do is forget about using RJS and just write functions in JavaScript that do things. I'll show you what this looks like in a moment. Put your functions in classes. Of course, JavaScript is not an inheritance-based language, it's a prototype-based language. But you can still organize your functions into sets. I'll show you what that looks like. Then organize your classes by behavior and location, and test drive everything you do. So these first two bullet points are what is typically known as unobtrusive JavaScript, which is a technique that's been around for a long time. And I'm happy to report that Rails 3 is adopting unobtrusive JavaScript instead of using these strange RJS helpers. So that'll definitely help. Once you move to Rails 3, you won't need to use the helpers in the same way. But as you can see, there's more to it than that. So let's see how we do it. So here's our original example. And so we're trying to think about how we could re-implement the remove link. Here's what the code looked like before. We had this link to function. And we can really simplify this now, because all we really have here is a link that we want to add a behavior to. So we can change it so that all it is a link to with a class on it. So there's no JavaScript anywhere in this ERB template anymore. And so this generates a very simple piece of HTML. So if we don't put our JavaScript in the HTML, then where do we put it? So in general, I keep my JavaScripts in public JavaScripts. And so I created a file in public JavaScripts called project_form.js. And here's what that would look like. We create a class called RubyKaigi.projectForm, which has two functions in it. And the two functions are initialize and remove task. So initialize adds a click event to links with the class remove link. When that link is clicked, then the other function is called, the remove task function, which actually removes the element with the class task from the DOM. And the other important thing in this slide is the document ready at the bottom, which initializes the project form once the page has been loaded. And so what I've done is created a JavaScript class that encapsulates the behavior of the project form. And once I implement the behavior of the add a task link, that behavior will go in the same class. So then it might look something like this, where you've got an extra piece of initialization at the top and an extra function at the bottom. So then the question becomes, what happens if you want to use this on more than one page? And in that case, you can move the initialize of the project form into a class that represents the page that you're sitting on. So, for example, say we had a form that we wanted to use, and we wanted to use this in both the new and the edit page, which is pretty common. Then you would create two new classes, two new JavaScript classes, project edit page and project new page. And here's what project edit page looks like. In your initialize function, you're initializing the project form object. And then when the document's being loaded at the bottom, you're initializing the project edit page class. And this looks like it's maybe a layer of indirection that we don't need. However, how this usually works out is that you have a page that has a bunch of stuff on it that's common, and then it has a bunch of stuff on it that's specific to that page. So you end up with an initialize method for the page that calls other initialize methods and then does some other stuff. So once your application gets more complicated, this pattern starts looking a lot better. And so project new page would look fairly similar, but it would have new page specific stuff underneath it instead. Pretty straightforward, I think. So that's how you would organize your JavaScript so that it's all in one place and it's easy to find and it's not scattered around all of your views. But what about testing? For testing at Pivotal, we use Jasmine. Jasmine is Pivotal's open source JavaScript testing framework. And it does behavior-driven development, sort of like RSpec. And RSpec style, I believe, is what they call it. And the philosophy of Jasmine is that you should test JavaScript with JavaScript. There are gems out there that will let you write Ruby code that tests your JavaScript. However, I think we're getting to the point where JavaScript needs to be a first-class citizen in your web applications. And I don't believe that writing JavaScript or writing Ruby code to test your JavaScript is going in the right direction. The other thing about Jasmine that's kind of interesting is that it has no dependency on the DOM. So while you can use it to test web applications, you can also use it to test JavaScript that doesn't run on top of a DOM, such as for WebOS or Objective-J and things like that. Here's what you all should do, not right now, because I don't think the wireless will take it. And once you do that, it comes with a rake task that will give you a JavaScript directory under your spec directory. So you keep your JavaScript specs in the same place you keep your other specs. And as you can see, I created a project form spec.js in the JavaScript directory. And in this file, we're going to describe the behavior of the functions in the project form class. So here's a spec that I wrote for remove class. It starts with a describe, like in RSpec. It has it blocks, as in RSpec. And both of those take a string describing what behavior you're expecting from the code. And Jasmine comes with a small set of matchers. As you can see, we've got the expect x to equal y pattern. And you can also write custom matchers like you can in RSpec. Jasmine comes with a little server built into it. It starts on port 8888 where you can run your specs in a browser. And to rerun your specs, you reload the page. It also comes with a continuous integration task that runs the specs in a browser and uses Selenium to determine whether or not they passed. And there are plugins available that let you run your specs headlessly, I believe, using Johnson. So, if you could take two things home with you today, I would say respect your JavaScript, because we're getting to the point now where it's almost becoming more important than the server language. And test drive everything you do. And if you do that, you can take your JavaScript experience from something like this to something like that. And with that, I will take questions. Shitsumon ga arimasu ka? We've looked at one, let's see, Pivotal has a project using Cappuccino right now. Sorry, the question was whether we've looked at any of the MVC JavaScript frameworks, such as Sammy.js, and I'm not sure what the other suggestion was. I don't know that one. Eyeballs.js. Haven't looked at that one, obviously. We haven't looked at either of those specifically. We are doing a project right now in Cappuccino, which is they pretty much wrote their own language called Objective-J on top of JavaScript. And we looked at Sprout Core, which is kind of a similar idea, but doesn't have as much commitment to open source as the 280 North guys did. So that's why we went with that one. We do a lot of JavaScript development for WebOS right now, and I'm not sure what the status is of the Jasmine plugin for Cappuccino. We have it internally. I don't think we've released it though.
So if you have any question, please come here and stand on the line, please.
Okay. Other questions? If you need to ask a question in Japanese, I'm sure somebody can translate. Nihongo ga daijoubu desu. There's a question in the back.
Hello. Kind of similar question what Alex asked about other library bits. I think so. Jasmine is your company's library. I assume like you've already tested other lots of other existing libraries. What's the pain point for the existing ones? Yeah.
So the question was, why did we write another JavaScript testing framework? I believe, when there are so many out there already. This is actually the third JavaScript testing framework that Pivotal has written. We wrote JUnit back in the day. We wrote ScrewUnit, so this is the third. And we looked at some other solutions like JSpec. But originally, our main point of contention there was that we needed something that didn't require a DOM. There were the JSpec, when we started the project, the JSpec folks did not seem very receptive to the idea of making the necessary changes so that JSpec could be run without dependency on a DOM. And the other pain point was that none of them they were all sort of declarative test unit style syntax. And as Pivotal is a very heavy RSpec user, we wanted something that was more in that style, that would allow us to use the same rubric for the different types of testing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to hog the question line again. So I noticed in one of your JavaScript testing slides, one thing that jumped out at me is obviously when you're writing tests, you're asserting the outcome of whatever you're testing, right? But usually when I'm writing JavaScript, maybe it's indicative of me not being very good at JavaScript, I don't really care about the return value of a given method. All I care is that this function does some stuff, right? I don't care what it returns. It's it should trigger a submit event or submit an AJAX request. I could really care less about what it returns. So how do you deal with that when you're testing JavaScript?
So I chose that example because it fit on the slide. Normally, I don't care either. In that case, because it's a click event, I did care about the return value because I didn't want the click event to propagate after that. There are things that basically Jasmine gives you a set of tools to say things like, I expect this AJAX call to be made. It gives you spies and mocks, so you can say, nice. I'm going to call this AJAX method with the following parameters, or I'm expecting this AJAX call to be submitted to the following URL. And it's nice because then since you're mocking it out, it doesn't actually go out and make the call. It just comes back and says, oh, I was called with these parameters. And it also has some things like is visible, is not visible. So you can say, I expect this div to be visible. I call this function. Then I expect this div to not be visible. So it does give you a lot of, sort of the basic set of stuff that you do in a web application with JavaScript. The visual effects and the AJAX calls and a bunch of other stuff that I'm sure I'm forgetting.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Volunteers to help work on Jasmine? Thank you very much. Arigatou gozaimasu.